A lot has happened with recruiting recently, mostly good, but some bad. We're going to break it all down here on today's show.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching on YouTube, you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or whatever listening platform you decide to choose. We're always free and available. And on today's show, it's all things Syracuse football recruiting, because over the past 24 plus hours, there's been a lot that's been happening on the Hill. 3 more players committed to Syracuse in the class of 2026. Plus, the Orange had a player decommit, but they also made a top 3 list for a high-end 3-star tight end prospect from Florida. We're going to break that all down later on in the show. We're going to start the podcast talking about some players who could potentially flip to Syracuse football. They were either committed to another school and have decommitted, or they are committed to a school, but Syracuse just got an official visit with them. All that and more here on today's show. And before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Syracuse, to start this segment here, is trying to poach a couple of either former or current Florida State commits. And later on here in this segment, we'll also talk about how Syracuse is trying to poach a defensive lineman from Vanderbilt. But let's start off with the big one from Florida State here. Tedarius Hughes, a 6'2", 170-pound, 4-star defensive back. He is rated as a 4-star recruit on 3 of the 4 major recruiting services. The lone one that didn't give him a 4-star is 24/7 Sports, but not the 24/7 Sports composite, just the regular 24/7 Sports ranking. But that's neither here nor there. He is currently a Florida State commit, but like I teased, or like I talked about, I should say, last week on the podcast, it was on Thursday, that 24/7 Sports was listing him as someone who was scheduled to visit Syracuse. Well, we know it's official. Tedarius Hughes did visit Syracuse football this past weekend. It's confirmed on social media. You can just go on Twitter. You can go on Instagram. It's all there. In fact, 4-star edge rusher commit for Syracuse, Cameron Wilson, was also on campus for the Orange this past weekend. And you can see on social media, he was actually trying to recruit Tedarius Hughes to Syracuse football. As far as the latest with the 4-star recruit Tedarius Hughes, no flip is imminent, but the visit is said to have gone well. This is something that I don't think we will get official word until signing day in early December. But Syracuse is going to be one of those schools trying to flip Tedarius Hughes from Florida State. For more context here, Tedarius Hughes actually attends Miami Northwestern in Florida, and that's significant for some because that's the same school as 5-star wide receiver Calvin Russell, who Syracuse is also trying to get. They're not trying to flip him or anything, but they are trying to get him, and he's committing on July 5th. Some of you may say, hey, Jackson, does this matter that the two of them go to the same school? To me, I don't think it hurts, right? 2 players that go to the same high school getting recruited by a similar college, I don't think it hurts. Hey, right? But at the same time, I wouldn't look too much into the fact that the 2 guys go to the same schools. And the reason is because at the end of the day, as much as it would be cool to, get teammates that team up together at college, these are still kids that got to make a decision that's best for themselves and also their family. So while it doesn't hurt that they go to the same school, Miami Northwestern, Tedarius Hughes and Calvin Russell, I'm not looking at that and saying, hey, that means that they're both going to come to Syracuse football it's a done deal. I mean, you could easily say that why can't Calvin Russell also go to Florida State with Tedarius Hughes, right? But that's just not necessarily how it works. I think aside, though, from Calvin Russell, because Calvin Russell is by far and away the number one priority for Syracuse football in recruiting in 2026. Tedarius Hughes is second. He's not Calvin Russell, but if Tedarius Hughes were to commit to Syracuse football, I think he would at least be a top 3 recruit in the class of 2026. And you can make a very strong case that he would be the number 1 player for Syracuse football in the 2026 class, especially because he'd be the only one for Syracuse that's rated a 4-star or better on 3 major recruiting services. Syracuse has 4 4-star recruits, but all of them in the class of 2026 are rated a 4-star on just 2 of the major recruiting services. There's 4 of them total. You got On3, you got Rivals, you got ESPN, and you got 24/7 Sports, for those that may not understand. But that's the latest with Tedarius Hughes, and hopefully Syracuse football can maintain a positive relationship with him and get him to sign during signing day in December as a possible flip candidate. Next up, you got Xavier Payne. He actually decommitted from Florida State yesterday. For those that don't know, Xavier Payne is 6'7", 320 pounds. He is a 3-star offensive lineman from Miami, Florida. Syracuse is definitely a school to watch for Xavier Payne for a couple of reasons. Number one, he officially visited campus on July 6th, according to 24/7 Sports. And as Brian Smith says, the host of the Locked On Portal podcast and also the host of Locked On Florida State Seminoles, if you get a guy on campus for an official visit, you got a chance. It at least gives you a puncher's chance at winning out in that recruitment. So that alone gives Syracuse a shot to land a guy like Xavier Payne. But also, he's originally from upstate New York. That can't hurt either. Now, we saw with Messiah Hampton how that does not necessarily mean everything. But I don't think it hurts that a guy like Xavier Payne has background and he is familiar with the area around Syracuse. Another school to keep an eye on with Xavier Payne, as far as potentially trying to flip him, again, he decommitted from Florida State yesterday, is Colorado. He visited Colorado on June 16th, according to 24/7 Sports, and kind of like Fran Brown, Deion Sanders, the head coach over at Colorado, is someone you really don't want to mess with in recruiting. He is an excellent recruiter, just like Fran Brown. So as of right now, I would say the 2 front runners for Xavier Payne after he decommitted from Florida State is Syracuse, that's good, and Colorado, well, it's never a good thing when another school is involved, right? I guess. I don't know. But finally, you got Daryl Campbell, 6'3", 300-pound defensive lineman, a 3-star Vanderbilt commit. He was also on Syracuse's campus this past weekend. And kind of like Tedarius Hughes, the visit seems to have gone well. All positive news and updates there, but nothing is imminent regarding him potentially flipping. He's also officially visited Cal and Oklahoma State. So Syracuse is not the only school involved for a guy like Daryl Campbell. But overall, those are 3 guys that Syracuse has a shot to potentially flip. You got Tedarius Hughes, a current Florida State commit. You got Daryl Campbell, a current Vanderbilt commit. And you got Xavier Payne, who is back on the market after decommitting from Florida State yesterday. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. Who would be your priority recruit of the 3? Is it Tedarius Hughes like myself? What I think? Is it Xavier Payne, another offensive lineman? He's a big dude, 6'7", 320 pounds. You like him? I do. And then you got Daryl Campbell, 6'3", 300-pound defensive lineman. Hey, you can never have enough defensive line help. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Who you believe Syracuse has a shot to flip in the class of 2026. Now, coming up, we're not going to talk about guys that may flip to Syracuse. We're going to talk about 3 players who actually verbally committed to Syracuse football. That's coming up next here on Locked On Syracuse. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling, right? Maybe you're going to a baseball game with some of your buddies, right? It's going to be a fun day or fun night at the ballpark. It's really exciting early on, and then all of a sudden you get to about the fourth or fifth inning, maybe the sixth inning, the pitchers start changing, and maybe you get a little bit bored, right? So that's when something like FanDuel can come in, because you can get in on the game basically at any time with same game parlays. And hey, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up, because new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we still got plenty more to talk about here on today's show. We're about to discuss how Syracuse football picked up not one, not two, but three verbal commitments over the past 24-ish hours. But before we do that, I just want to shout out each and every one of you. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this podcast. And since you've already made it this far into the podcast, if you just do me a favor, if you haven't done so already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And also shout out to all you who continue to like and subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. You all are truly the best. Now let's get into the recruiting action once again, right? Syracuse football picked up 3 verbal commitments over the past day or so. Crazy, right? Fran Brown and recruiting, it just does not stop. It does not rest. Let's start with the biggest one of the 3. Chase Geeter, a 6-foot, 180-pound defensive back from Ashburn, Virginia. He is a consensus 3-star recruit, but he's not too far from being a 4-star player. So I do wonder how the recruiting services will continue to rate him going forward, if he'll stay a 3-star or maybe even get bumped up to a 4-star recruit at some point, because right now he's rated as the 55th best corner in the country on 24/7 Sports. Not too far again from being a 4-star. And also, you got to consider the other schools that were going after Chase Geeter. He chose Syracuse over Duke, Virginia, Wisconsin. He also bypassed an official visit to Michigan this past weekend. So this is a pretty good player that Syracuse football picked up. Definitely the highest rated of the 3 from this past weekend. And currently on 24/7 Sports, I should say, I apologize. He's the 3rd best player in Syracuse's class, behind Amari Goff and Jarius Rogers. He did mention in his conversation with Mike McAllister on 24/7 Sports how one of the reasons why Chase Geeter ultimately committed to Syracuse football is the fact that Fran Brown is coaching him, and that it's very appealing. Why would a defensive back say that? Well, the reason is pretty simple. For those that don't know, Fran Brown's background is with defensive backs. He was the defensive backs coach at Georgia before Syracuse. So that's why it always seems like Syracuse has not a very good chance, but typically a pretty good shot at landing good defensive backs in recruiting because of Fran Brown's background. Actually, going back to last segment, talking about Tedarius Hughes, right? I think it's more important that Fran Brown has his background with defensive backs, more so than the fact that he's a Miami Northwestern guy, and Calvin Russell's also a Miami Northwestern guy, and Syracuse has gotten a couple of Miami Northwestern guys in the past. I think Fran Brown's background as a DB's coach matters so much more for DBs than what high school they go to. So Chase Geeter, that's something that he mentioned with Mike McAllister when he committed to Syracuse football very recently. So congratulations to Chase Geeter, along with the other 2 players that we are about to mention here on this podcast. Next up, you got Carter Bashir, a 6'5", 250-pound tight end from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a consensus 3-star recruit for Syracuse football. He officially visited Syracuse a couple of weeks ago, and he chose the Orange over a few schools like Miami, South Carolina, Duke, and others. And he spoke very highly about Syracuse's culture when he committed to the team. And then finally, we got another specialist that committed in the class of 2026. Shay Baker, 6'2", 190-pound kicker from Pennsylvania. He is the first kicker to commit to Syracuse football in the class of 2026. But like I said, at the top, another specialist. And that's because Syracuse does have a punter in their recruiting class as well, Jimmy Gregg. He just so happens to be the highest rated punter in the country on 24/7 Sports. Again, can't hurt. Can't hurt to have the best punter in the country. You never want to use your punter, but you might have to sometimes. With a guy like Shay Baker, on the other hand, I hope we see him quite a bit. I hope, right? That'd be nice if we saw Shay Baker on the field a lot, but not kicking field goals. I would like him to kick extra points. That would be nice. Field goals aren't terrible. I'd rather a field goal than a punt, but that's neither here nor there, okay? So those are the three players that committed. You got Chase Dieter, a defensive back. You got Carter Bashir, a tight end. And you also got Shay Baker, a kicker. So where does Syracuse's class now stand for the class of 2026 I'm talking about? Good news, and there's really no bad news, so we'll just say just good news. Syracuse football's 2026 class at the time of this recording remains top 30 in the nation on 24/7 Sports. The exact number is 28th. I think a reasonable goal for Syracuse football, and I've said it before here on this podcast, this is now year 3 of recruiting for Fran Brown. I think it's a fair expectation and a fair goal for Syracuse football to have a top 30 overall class in the country, because their first two classes were pretty close. In 2024, they were 36th in the nation. 2025, they took a slight step back. I believe they were 42nd in the nation, if my memory serves correct. Right now, they're 28th. They can keep it. Now, it's going to depend on a couple of factors, which I'll get into in just a moment here. But I think, again, it is a fair and reasonable expectation for Fran Brown and Syracuse football to have a top 30 high school recruiting class in the country on 24/7 Sports, or really just any major recruiting service. What are your thoughts? What are your expectations? Where would you like to see it ranked? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. I realize I kind of phrased that question pretty poorly. I mean, I would like to see the class be number 1 in the nation, but I guess I should say, what's a fair expectation? What's reasonable here? I'm not asking Syracuse to go out and out-recruit Georgia. I don't think that's ever going to be possible. But top 30, year 3 of Fran Brown recruiting, I definitely think there's a chance at that. Aside from the rankings, Syracuse currently, again, it's recruiting. Things can change on the dime. I'm recording this about a couple hours before you might be watching or listening to this podcast. But Syracuse has 23 verbal commits so far, with 3 decommits. We'll talk about the decommits more in the next segment. They'll likely need to land Calvin Russell and or Tedarius Hughes to keep a top 30 class. That's my take on it. You land a 5-star wide receiver in Calvin Russell, I think you'll definitely have top 30. You land Tedarius Hughes, probably top 30, maybe just outside of it. You land both, you might be looking at top 25, top 20. If you land neither, then you need to pull a rabbit out of your hat. So that's the latest with Syracuse football 2026 recruiting, as far as where it ranks right now and some of the recruits that they got very recently. Now, coming up, we'll talk about some more recruiting news. Syracuse football cracked a top 3 list for a prospect, and they also had someone decommit. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Syracuse. While Syracuse football over the past 24-ish hours have picked up 3 verbal commits to add to their 2026 recruiting class, that's great. They also just had a player decommit, and that's Jackson Gates, a 3-star defensive back. He was one of the better recruits in Syracuse's 2026 class, so it's kind of a bummer, to be honest with you, that Jackson Gates committed or decommitted from the program today. He is the 3rd player to decommit from Syracuse football in the 2026 class. He joins Isaiah Williams, who has quite literally been committed to every single program around the nation, and Zayden McDonald, who cited the fact that he wants to go to Stanford for education, and can't really fault him on that. Jackson Gates was always someone that I was keeping an eye on because he's a California kid. And like I said on the podcast, keeping a guy from California is, especially at this point in recruiting, right? You're not near signing day. Signing day isn't until early December. I thought would be very tricky for Syracuse football, especially if his recruitment started to pick up which it kind of did. And Jackson Gates was recently on an official visit to BYU. I think they are the favorite to go and get him. Not that it necessarily matters anymore for Syracuse unless they can try to flip him back, which I don't think they will. It seems like he's going to stay on the West Coast. And he's going to go to a West Coast school like BYU, not be too far from his home in California. It just makes sense. I wish Jackson Gates nothing but the best. It's kind of a bummer. Again, he was one of the better recruits in Syracuse's 2026 class. The good news is, like we talked about in the last segment, they did get Chase Dieter, who is rated, I think, around the same as Jackson Gates, also a defensive back. So that's good. They're not completely screwed, I guess. Not that they would have been completely screwed anyway. And then finally, actually not finally, I apologize here. We still got more news to talk about because Syracuse did pick up a commit in the class of 2027, but 2027 recruiting is so far away from now that honestly we won't spend too much time from it, but we will shout it out. 6'3", 290-pound defensive lineman Stanley Montgomery from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Orange have 4 commits in the class of 2027. They got a defensive back, Travis Miles, an athlete, Tank White, and a quarterback in Justin Dixon. But like I said, with 2027, it's so far down the line, unless they get some massive recruit, we're not going to spend too much time on the 2027 class. And finally, again, now we've reached the final part of the news part, okay? Syracuse made a top 3 list for 3-star tight end Julius Miles. He's from Freeport, Florida. That's not too far from Tallahassee, Florida, which is where Florida State is located. Unsurprisingly, the top 3 also includes Florida State, and the other school in Julius Miles' top 3 is Louisville. 24/7 Sports says that Miles visited Syracuse on June 6th. He's actually committing to whatever school, I should say. I almost said Syracuse, but to whatever school he decides on July 5th. Why is that significant? It's the same day as 5-star Calvin Russell. So July 5th, hopefully Syracuse could land at least one, preferably being Calvin Russell, but hopefully they do not strike out completely on July 5th. So we got 2 recruitments to monitor, 2 decisions, I should say, on July 5th. So that's that. That's all the recruiting update. We got the possible flips, 3 more commits in the class of 2026. We got another commit in the class of 2027. We got a guy who decommitted from Syracuse, and we got someone who put Syracuse in the top 3. I hope I did my best to try to summarize everything that Syracuse football did throughout the weekend. Of course, if you have any questions, if you are left feeling confused, comment in the comment section below, and I will try to answer your question to the best of my abilities. But again, it's Fran Brown. It's Syracuse football. It's different now. They don't stop recruiting. So, yeah, that's just how it's going to be, right? It's good, though. It's good for Syracuse. Now, as far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, I don't think we'll be doing many football recruiting podcasts unless something big happens. Maybe some more commits, right? But tomorrow, for now, what I have planned is the Syracuse football podcast, but we will go over their floor ceiling combination for this upcoming season. So we'll go over a best case scenario for them, a worst case scenario, somewhere in the middle of where I think that they're going to be. And then on Wednesday, we'll do the same thing for Syracuse basketball, a floor ceiling combination for that team. We really have not been talking about basketball for a while here on this podcast. And the reason is because there just has not been much going on with Syracuse basketball. But we will get a Syracuse basketball episode in at some point this week, barring any significant breaking news. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future. And thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. You can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.